If you love classic cars, then Donald loves you.
There's nothing probably more related to the history of cars, especially here in Newport, than the electric. And although people really think of the newness of the electric vehicle, of course, it's something that's a very old concept, and from the start of horseless motoring was a very important part of the automotive scene. In fact, electric, steam, and internal combustion gasoline engines more or less shared the market, and electrics were extremely popular, and especially among a population that was very prevalent here in Newport. And that, of course, are wealthy women. The car I'm driving in today is a 1911 Rauch and Lang Roadster. This pioneering electric car company began to manufacture electric cars in 1905 in Cincinnati, Ohio, and this particular example is never been restored. It is mostly original and was originally delivered to the mother of the great sportsman Briggs Cunningham of Cunningham Sports Car and America's Cup racing fame. It's hard to comprehend what the electric car meant to the market, because one of the primary drawbacks to the gasoline combustion cars, the early ones, was not only the fact that they were very noisy and vibrated a great deal and were total loss oiling systems and generally very messy. Also the fact that starting an internal combustion engine car back in the pioneering days was also very hard work. You had to crank very, very strong, and you had the chance of kickback, which was also not a very good thing to have happen. And as a result, of course, it limited the driving of the car to really intrepid automobilists, most of whom were men. However, one of the things that the electric car offered was not only silent, smooth, drama-free and dirt-free motoring, but also ease of starting. You simply engaged the starting lever and off you went. No cranking, no worrying about priming cups and all of this. And it made it much simpler for the early motorist to get going. Driving an electric car like this here on Bellevue Avenue, Newport, really takes you back to the early days of motoring, when lots of wealthy women who lived here in Newport in the cottages would use transportation such as this to drive back and forth to visit, to go to the casino, to have lunch at the LaForge restaurant, and in general to have a level of freedom that women had not enjoyed before the invention of the automobile. And as such, it really can be seen as a great force in the liberation of women and their changing roles in society. You didn't have to go out with the horsemen to accompany you when driving your electric. And controlling these cars was very easy, very simple. You didn't have to worry about gear changing and lots of very strong, heavy mechanical activities. And even today, driving around town, it's a perfect conveyance. In modern time and modern traffic, this is really all the performance you need. Rauch and Lang is also a fascinating company. Based in Cleveland, Ohio, they started as a carriage company and began to sell and assemble electric automobiles around 1901. And by 1905, they were building their own cars. And they were known for very high market cars. These were very expensive cars when new. And by the time this car came along in 1911, they were advertising both chain and shaft drive vehicles. This is a shaft drive car. And for the shaft drive cars, a revolutionary smooth power delivery through a bevel gear. That also becomes very interesting because in 1912, of course, Charles Kettering had introduced the first self-starter on the Cadillac. And so the writing was on the wall for the electric car, since its primary attribute over the internal combustion car was the fact that you didn't have to crank it. Now that you could have an internal combustion car you didn't have to crank, the advantages were slowly going away because obviously you didn't have the limitation of range on an internal combustion car that you had with an electric car. The revolutionary bevel gear drive that made the Rauch & Lang so smooth was actually apparently the invention of the Baker Electric Company, and that company sued Rauch & Lang in 1912 for patent infringement. But what happened, quite ironically, is that by 1915, the two companies had merged because they realized that with the market for electric cars shrinking and the competition becoming ever stronger, they really needed to get together to make sure that they could stay in business. And so it became the Baker, Rauch & Lang Company, and they continued to manufacture electric cars through World War I, when they switched over to war production. And then after the war, things really were slow for the electric car market. And so the company was wound up and was reorganized in Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts. And they soldiered on making cars until 1920, and then they were gone. But this is really an interesting conveyance because, as I said before, driving an electric car of this period is a fascinating exercise because when you think about what might have been had electric car technology continued to develop directly from this early period through to today, what we might have. And of course, this car also shares with the electric cars of today many of their key characteristics. It's actually fairly sprightly off the line, especially for a 1911 car. Very easy to control, and of course, the smoothness and silence of the car are quite remarkable when you consider what was going on with most 1911 internal combustion engine cars. To be in this car on Bellevue Avenue is to not only take a step back in time, but to live in that time. I see one of the neighbors. Perhaps Mrs. Vanderbilt wants to come out for a lunch.